Today, I'm going to tell you the history of our people as we lived here, this place we call Nalox. Thousands of years ago, we lived here and all the way around this giant lake, filled with fish. One year, there was a famine. Our fish didn't come back as good as they once did. And so we struggled trying to survive, not having anything to eat. To make matters worse, there was a giant serpent that lived in these rocks, and the serpent would come down and prey on our people. Our creator, C'waam and Koptu, was watching this the whole time, and he drew this obsidian ceremonial knife, and he grabbed the snake and he cut it into many, many pieces, and he turned to the lake and he threw the pieces out into the lake, and he had taken the pieces of the serpent and turned it into our C'waam, a returning of our fish. And he told us we are attached to him physically and spiritually. And so when these fish suffer, we ourselves suffer as a people.
We're a nation of people. We're actually 3 different people groups that came together, through treaty. And this is our Aboriginal homeland. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful place and so abundant with all the resources that we could live here.
It's awe-inspiring. I mean, any trip along the lake, early in the morning or in the evening, and how the sun hits it and how it changes, or how the fog lays on the river in the mornings.
There's a spiritual, legal, a moral connection to this land.
We've always been here. We don't have any other spot. This place is in our DNA. This water is our DNA. This land is our DNA.
We have very unique species of beautiful fish. We call them C'waam, Koptu, yen, suckers.
The fish are something that our ancestors depended on, at the end of long winters. Huge, huge food source, protein source, right at the time of the year when it was very much needed.
That was your survival. You could depend on fish for food to eat.
The C'waam and Koptu are found only in the upper Klamath Basin, nowhere else in the world and probably the universe, which means they're endemic, which means they're uniquely adapted to this particular environment.
In the spring, it usually ends up around the 3rd week in March that we have our Return of C'waam ceremony. They would seek the Creator, and they would fast and they'd pray and they'd come back together. The pure intent of that was to thank our Creator for the fish.
It was important for us to have the ceremony every year. It's through our stories passed down that we get our instruction.
I think that one of the things that ceremony does is it puts people at ease because it produces a unity of understanding. And that's really important for a tribal community, to stay connected to who we are. And we're working really hard to bring that back.
But things have changed so significantly in the last 100+ years. The things that were here and should be here are lost. Just the very fact that our C'waam and our Koptu are endangered, it points out that there's been significant change.
So over the course of the last 150 years or so, all of the erosion has deposited this what we call diatomaceous ooze, and it happens to be naturally high in phosphorus. Each year, most of the time, I believe it's been every year for the last few years, the lake gets listed by the county health department as essentially a toxic water body. There's advice, obviously, not to drink the water. Don't let your dogs drink the water. Don't let your kids swim in the lake. Don't touch the water. It's poison, essentially.
If you get close to it, it doesn't smell very good, for one, and it's green. Can't really swim in it, but if anyone wants to jump in there, go ahead, but I'm not jumping in that lake.
It contains a neurotoxin that we water our food with. That strikes me as absurd.
You know, when you talk to our elders, they'll tell you they used to swim there. My dad used to train swimming across there, right? Those are things now you wouldn't even let your animal touch it. So, of course, it's horrible. It's depressing.
Water becomes such a critical resource for farming, for ranching, for the health of the stream, for the health of the lakes, for certainly for the fish.
A lot of issues at this point have to do with water pollution and water that is not clean enough for our fish. I don't think Oregonians want to see this sort of situation occurring.
Each year, tens to hundreds of millions of larvae are produced by the C'waam and the Koptu, and due to lake conditions, they are all essentially dead by the fall of each year. The little ones drift down to the lake. They enter the few remaining wetlands that are available. They then go out to the lake. The lake then has a massive algae bloom, and in the fall, this algae bloom starts to die back. And when that algae dies back, bacteria decompose the algae, absorb all the oxygen from the water, and cause a lake-wide, what we call anoxia, the absence of oxygen in the water column. The younger fish are just generally more susceptible, weaker, and the vast majority of time they can't make it through the summer.
They consistently die every year because the lake dies every year. And it'd be hard to try and reverse all the things done to that lake.
Yeah. You know, they're always under stress here in the lake. Just coming here, it looks like it's so beautiful, unless you really look close and smell the water. If the fish die, the people die. You know, we see the signs, you know, they're getting pretty sick. It's the canary in the coal mine. It's had a significant impact on our native people. You know, we have heart disease, diabetes, obesity issues. We've got things that were foreign to us. Our people are dying.
We didn't grow up on animals like pigs and cattle. C'waam were so multiple. That is what I feel is important to us to restore our health.
It's one of about 35,000 that are left on the planet.
Those fish are bottom feeders. They're natural filters. They clean the rivers. They clean the lake. That's what their purpose is. These fish are worth saving because they're part of this ecosystem.
Generally speaking, they were all born in 1991 or 1993, typically. So all of them are very old, very tired. In a normal scenario, each year you would see the bulk of the adults show up. But you'd also see a fairly large number of young fish moving up with those adults. And we very, very rarely see younger fish that are joining those large adult fish.
The youngest of the suckers, this is 25 years old. And to me, that was a 5-alarm fire.
The older fish that are doing the spawning are nearing the end of their life cycle. And so if we don't have successful, the biologists call it recruitment, right, then we're going to lose them in the wild.
If we all don't act now, these fish will most likely be extinct in less than 10 years. The goal here at our research station is to halt the decline of the species and assist in its recovery back to harvestable levels for the tribe. These are the larvae that were collected in May 2020. Hopefully they will live to be 50 plus years old. They're not even one yet. But we can only do that if the lake is healthy and clean.
You'll hear that the fish aren't able to reproduce, and they haven't reproduced for decades, right? And we strongly believe, of course, that that's related to water quality.
We have two major components when it comes to water in the Upper Klamath Basin. One is the water quantity.
Some of the first reclamation projects were started in the late 1800s. They dug big canals. It was all geared to irrigate.
Development of irrigated agriculture has basically been unchecked by the state of Oregon and by the federal government.
Our resources need that water, whether it's fish or the aquatic resources. There's not enough water to meet our needs and needs of ranchers and farmers.
Because of irrigation, we consistently lower the lake below levels that were there historically, and that has impacts on the habitat for the fish.
That lake is thousands and thousands of years old, and it's evolved into a very, very specific environment. And to reduce all of that complexity that's come about over thousands of years to simply an irrigation trough is just foolish.
By the end of the summer, roughly 75% of the lake is gone. Imagine if you took your nice big home aquarium, it has 100 fish in it. I'm going to take all but, say, 4 inches of water off the bottom. Those 100 fish are still in there. And all those fish are going to be expected to survive as if everything is the same, as if it's normal. Again, that's something that these species have never encountered, which is why we're seeing them gradually fade away. The second component is the water quality. When development came in, the first thing to exploit would have been the timber resources. The easiest one to exploit was the ones next to the river, where you could fell the trees near the river, put them in the rivers, float them down to the lake, float them down to Klamath Falls, and process them. By removing all those trees, you kill the roots that are binding those sediment particles that have the phosphorus in it. Those sediment particles then wash into the river, they get deposited in the lake. The second major event that happened was the introduction of cattle grazing. Once you remove all the trees, you have a lot of open land, you can bring in cattle, and their hooves take all that loose soil and they gradually press the banks down and move that sediment into the rivers. There's no mechanism anymore for the phosphorus to be taken up by the wetlands that surround the lake or the riparian vegetation. So it's gradually accumulated in the lake over time, fueling the algae blooms.
What is more important? The livelihood of the first settlers and the ranchers and the farmers, the potato growers, alfalfa growers, or the tribes and this fish? Well, what weighed the most?
People bring in the cattle. You'll see them coming in. A lot of them come from California, and overwhelming what the land can handle, and then taking them back out again.
You're not supposed to impact water quality through your agricultural or cattle operations. Unfortunately, those are largely ignored.
One of the biggest problems that we have is that our members can see their cattle in our rivers, right? And that's deeply offensive. You can't have massive amounts of cattle trampling stream banks, right? Widening out these rivers, making them shallow and warmer. Right? You can't have them defecating in the river. You can't block off cold, clean springs, right, that used to feed the rivers and flood irrigate.
There's standards in place that must be met in order to have agriculture in Oregon. They're simply not followed. And there is essentially no enforcement of the rules in Klamath County.
Well, the first thing that should happen is they should enforce the clean water laws. right? Somehow, the Oregon Department of Agriculture got put in charge of enforcing the clean water laws in the state. And from my perspective, that's been a disaster, right? We see those laws being violated every day here in our homeland. So just enforce the law would be a good start.
We're talking about the Clean Water Act, which again is the Congress delegated states to determine water quality standards and all those things to be developed and enforced by the state of Oregon. Nutrients are the main problem that we have that accelerate the algal blooms and cause the poor water quality conditions that are killing our fish. And you guys have a responsibility to monitor that.
The Federal Clean Water Act does not regulate agriculture, forestry practices directly. It asks the states to put together best management practices, but those aren't regulations. People aren't, at least under federal law, required to comply with a best management practice. And this is part of the problem, frankly.
There's deep resistance to a lot of commonly used methods to fix this issue. At a very minimum, simply putting up a 4-wire barbed wire fence with a water gap and allowing that vegetation to naturally recover. It will. In the absence of human pressure, nature almost always recovers.
I have maintained the fences, put fences along both sides of the river. I keep the cattle off of the river. On this side of the river, I've put in a place for the cattle to water. It was relatively inexpensive. There wasn't a lot of engineering thought process that had to go into it. It was just common sense and logic. I had to come to the realization that I am an Indian, and I'm proud of this land right here, and I'm proud of my heritage, and I'm proud that I can run cattle right here, and I have the knowledge to do it. You can do this. The way I've done it was inexpensive.
Instead of them going, I just need to fence this and control the grazing and restore the system just because it's the right thing to do, some people have said, well, if I get water, I'll do that. And the government has to pay for it. And so that's what we're dealing with.
So the state of Oregon is, I guess, basically charged with regulation, and there's various loopholes, there's various laws that need to be changed and addressed.
In simple terms, the state can tell farmers to stop carrying out practices that are putting pollution into our rivers. They don't want to hear from the Department of Agriculture if they're telling them there's a problem with livestock in the river. I know the water master's been threatened, and I've heard other agency personnel being threatened recently also. Important point here, though, is Department of Agriculture can't require somebody to fence. They could require somebody to keep their cattle out of a stream, but they can't specifically say you have to put up a fence. In order to get a rancher to stop, we have to have evidence that shows that they've been letting their cattle get into a stream.
Yeah, we filmed a lot of it.
I would love to see the film. That actually would be helpful for us.
It does get political when you're trying to protect our fish and you need water for that. People will marginalize those fish. They're not as important as the American farmer and the other food source. And consequently, the tribes and our people aren't as important. To me, it's a tragedy that we're marginalized in our homeland because all we're trying to do is protect who we are and the things that are the remnant. I want to say the remnant of what was once here.
What our tribal people are standing for and what we're fighting for and what we've been fighting for since time immemorial is to protect this place for everybody that lives here.
And one of the fundamental solutions is to reduce irrigated agriculture, because what we're doing isn't sustainable. It's evident by the fact that we have endangered fish in the lake. There's too many people after too little water.
We need more boots on the ground to be able to see where that rancher is letting their cattle get in a stream, or somebody's cutting down willows in a riparian zone, and stop it. And if necessary, fine people.
Be honorable people. Think about what you're doing. Think about how your kids and your grandkids are going to think about what you're doing, what you're presiding over here as these fish go extinct.
There's no way to bring back the suckers. Once they're gone, they're gone.
We're going to fight you, and we'll fight you to the bitter end.
I just want to keep ringing that 5-alarm bell and saying we've got to go forward really aggressively.
With respect to these fish, the clock is ticking and we are running towards a cliff. There's no parachute on this one. Once they're gone, they are gone for the rest of time.